Imagine a 9-year-old child who can instantly identify the make and model of a military drone just by the pitch of its hum in the sky.
Wow.
Yeah, but, this same kid hasn't even had the opportunity to learn how to read a basic book yet.
That is just heartbreaking.
It really is. And the thing is, that's not some dystopian fiction pitch.
Yeah.
That is the baseline reality for an entire generation growing up in Gaza right now.
Yeah, it's a completely different world.
It is. Welcome to today's Deep Dive. It is June 2026, and the world's eyes are once again locked on the Middle East.
Right, but we are looking at this through a very different lens today.
Exactly. Our stack of sources isn't, a pile of standard geopolitical white papers or cable news transcripts.
Thank goodness.
Right. Instead, we've got our hands on this really fascinating collection of drafts, production notes, and script revisions for an upcoming, incredibly comprehensive documentary.
And this project covers the ongoing crisis involving the U.S., Israel, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza, right?
Yep, all of them. Which gives us a totally unique behind-the-scenes look at how storytellers are struggling to frame a narrative that is moving way faster than the news cycle.
I mean, it's a narrative that is fundamentally altering millions of lives across multiple borders as we speak.
It really is. Now, before we jump in, a quick note. These sources contain highly politically charged perspectives about several nations and leaders. We are not taking any sides or endorsing these viewpoints today.
Right, absolutely not.
Our mission is simply to unpack the central thesis the original authors are trying to convey.
And that mission is pretty ambitious, to say the least.
Definitely. We are examining the stark disconnect between the boardroom strategies of global leaders and the raw, on-the-ground reality of the civilians who are actually caught in the crossfire.
The people who actually have to live through it.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because the very first major theme these documentary drafts tear into is vocabulary.
Oh, the language used is so deliberate.
Right? Specifically, how the language of modern statecraft is engineered to mask the physical reality of what is actually happening.
What's fascinating here is the psychological distancing built into the terminology.
Yeah?
We constantly hear words like leverage and deterrence and calculated escalation.
Right. Calculated escalation.
Yeah, and when Donald Trump talks about the art of the deal, or Benjamin Netanyahu discusses national security imperatives, or even Iranian officials speaking of regional resistance.
They all doing the same thing.
Exactly. They are utilizing a lexicon designed for the boardroom, not the battlefield. The filmmakers are pointing out that this language functions as an acoustic shield.
Acoustic shield, I like that term.
Yeah, it basically protects the policymaker and the domestic audience from the visceral horror of the policy's actual implementation.
Well, yeah, because calculated escalation sounds like an Excel spreadsheet function.
Right, it sounds totally safe.
It sounds mathematical, clean, contained.
Mm.
But when you apply that phrase to a densely populated urban area, the math is just human bodies.
It's just devastating.
The documentary drafts highlight this inherent conflict between military or political objectives and purely human objectives.
Because a military commander might define success as, say, degrading an enemy's infrastructure by 20%.
Sure.
But a mother defines success as her kids waking up in the morning and, maybe finding a loaf of bread that doesn't cost an entire day's wages.
It's two completely different definitions of reality, occupying the exact same physical space. I mean, it's like watching a chess match where the players are focused on controlling the center of the board, but they completely ignore that the pawns are actual people.
That is a brilliant way to put it. History produces a vast number of tactical winners, but far fewer human winners.
Yeah.
When a state actor achieves strategic depth, what they have often actually achieved is the displacement of 100,000 families.
Which is just wild.
The vocabulary of the state simply lacks the capacity, or perhaps the willingness, to describe the human toll accurately.
But wait, let's look at this from the perspective of the policymakers for a second. Governments aren't making these decisions in a vacuum.
That's true.
But don't governments argue that strategic patience or military leverage is required to ensure long-term safety? Like, it's a necessary evil to prevent a much worse alternative.
They do, yeah. And the documentary doesn't ignore that reality at all. Statecraft does require long-term planning.
Right.
But the friction the filmmakers are exposing is that strategical patience means something entirely different depending on your zip code.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, to a politician sitting in a fortified capital, strategic patience is a geopolitical maneuver. It's holding back a strike to secure a better diplomatic position next month.
Okay, sure.
But to a civilian living on a volatile border, Postponed conflict doesn't feel like patience. It just means another decade of air raid sirens.
Wow, yeah.
It means a decade of constant grinding anxiety, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. The cost of that geopolitical patience is literally subsidized by the nervous systems of civilians.
Which perfectly bridges us into the physical reality of what that leverage actually looks like on the ground right now in June 2026.
It's grim.
Yeah, if the language of the evening news is sanitized, the logistical reality is anything but. The filmmakers have compiled statistics that are honestly difficult to process. Let's look at Lebanon.
Okay.
The notes indicate that 1 in 5 people in the country are currently displaced.
1 in 5. That's unbelievable.
That is over 1 million people.
And, we have to think about the infrastructure required to suddenly absorb 20% of a nation's population moving all at once.
You just can't.
No, you don't just pick up 1 million people and put them somewhere else without breaking the system. And a third of those displaced are children.
It's just awful.
The filmmakers highlight the visceral mechanics of this. Imagine families in southern Lebanon packing whatever they can shove into the trunk of a car at 300 am because an evacuation order was just broadcast.
It's just absolute panic. And the cascading effects of that sudden movement are huge. Nearly a quarter of the entire country is facing immediate food insecurity right now because agricultural supply lines are just shattered.
Yeah, everything grinds to a halt.
And it's not just the combatants who are in danger. The documentary notes detail how 6 Red Cross workers were killed in March and April.
That's so tragic.
These are people actively trying to navigate deconfliction channels to deliver basic medical aid. It completely shatters the illusion of calculated strikes when international aid workers, driving clearly marked vehicles and sharing their coordinates, are still being killed.
It really reveals the chaotic friction of modern warfare. The map in a general's tent might look organized, but the street level is ruled by fog, miscommunication, and blunt force.
Exactly.
Then the documentary turns its lens to Gaza, shifting from the crisis of displacement to the crisis of entrapment.
Right.
We're talking about over 2 million residents trapped without reliable access to clean water, let alone functioning hospitals.
Which brings us back to that 9-year-old child we mentioned at the start. Knowing the sound of an incoming airstrike, but not knowing how to read. We're witnessing an entire generation that has never experienced a single day of peace.
Never. Not one.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the script poses a pointed, almost philosophical question to the leadership of every nation involved.
Right. I loved this part.
If everyone is going on television claiming some form of strategic success or tactical victory, why are children still dying in shelters?
Exactly. That is the central paradox of this entire geopolitical era. The policymakers claim the system is working, yet the human evidence suggests a total systemic failure.
Completely.
The filmmakers are synthesizing these ground realities to emphasize that, to the people living there, these are not proxy wars.
Right, that's a boardroom term again.
Yeah, we use the term proxy war in the West to denote a conflict managed by larger powers through local actors. It sounds almost bureaucratic.
Yeah, sterile.
But a proxy war still drops real bombs. To the residents, it is the permanent erasure of their homes and their histories. A neighborhood that has existed for 1,000 years, carrying the lineage of countless families, can just be turned to ash in an afternoon.
It fundamentally alters the DNA of a region. And the sources emphasize that the damage of this conflict isn't confined to the blast radius of the bombs.
No, it spreads.
War is a contagion.
Yeah.
It ripples outward through global economics and displaced populations. It creates these invisible fronts that we rarely talk about.
Yeah, the forgotten fronts. The documentary dedicates significant time to exploring how high-level diplomacy and escalation directly dictate the baseline survival of people hundreds or thousands of miles from the actual fighting.
The perfect example in the notes is Iran. We know millions of people in Iran live under severe economic sanctions.
All right.
But the documentary drafts humanize this by focusing on a cancer patient in Shiraz. This person is desperately waiting for imported chemotherapy drugs.
Just trying to survive.
Right. Now, technically, humanitarian goods and medicines are often exempt from international sanctions. But the mechanism of how this actually plays out is brutal.
Because of the overarching sanctions and the regional instability, global financial institutions engage in what's called overcompliance.
Okay, break that down for us.
So a European bank might refuse to clear a completely legal transaction for medicine simply because they fear the massive fines associated with accidentally violating a U.S. sanction.
Oh, wow.
They decide the Iranian market just isn't worth the regulatory risk, so the supply chain freezes entirely.
Exactly. The geopolitical leverage being applied in Washington or Brussels translates directly into a hospital in Shiraz not having the drugs a patient needs to survive.
Yeah.
The patient pays the ultimate price for a compliance officer's risk aversion in Frankfurt. It is a stunning illustration of how invisible lines of force connect political strategy directly to human suffering.
And then there is the temporal ripple effect, which we see most clearly in Syria. The notes remind us that Syria has endured 14 years of continuous war,
14 years.
resulting in the largest refugee crisis in modern history.
Think about what that actually means.
Mm-hmm.
There are teenagers today, entering high school age, who were literally born in exile.
Yeah.
They were born in refugee camps across Europe and the Middle East, and they have never seen the streets their parents grew up on.
Statelessness is a profound bureaucratic and psychological nightmare. To be born without a recognized state means you often lack a passport, you lack the legal right to work in your host country, you essentially exist as a ghost within the global system.
That's terrifying.
The war didn't just destroy the buildings in their hometowns, it effectively broke their futures before they even began. They are caught in a permanent limbo, waiting for a geopolitical resolution that never actually arrives.
And the filmmakers make a brilliant pivot here to ensure you, the listener, understand that you are not immune to these ripples, regardless of where you live.
Oh, this part is crucial.
They get directly back to the global economy. A massive focal point in these scripts is the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Strait of Hormuz is the literal choke point for roughly 20% of global oil flows.
20%.
So when regional stability in the Middle East is threatened, the risk premium on oil futures spikes immediately.
Which means the concept of escalation suddenly hits your wallet. The scripts trace the mechanics of this so well. A diplomatic breakdown in the Middle East causes oil prices to jump.
Yeah.
Suddenly, a truck driver in Germany is paying significantly more for diesel to transport goods. That increased transportation cost is passed directly to the consumer.
Exactly.
So a family in Ohio goes to the grocery store and gets hit by inflation, struggling to afford basic groceries, in a way that actually parallels the economic struggle of a family in Isfahan, Iran.
It perfectly illustrates how leverage travels. We tend to think of international borders as fire breaks that contain conflict.
Right, like it stops at the line.
But globalized supply chains mean that instability is instantly exported worldwide. A disruption in the Red Sea or the Strait of Hormuz affects the baseline survival of ordinary people globally. The pain is distributed.
Which forces us to look at the mechanics of this entire system. If the human cost is universally devastating and the economic ripple effects harm working-class people everywhere, why does this cycle keep spinning?
Right. Who's driving the car?
Exactly. What is the actual underlying machinery driving this? The documentary drafts take a very dark, uncompromising stance on this.
They argue that wars continue because they are fundamentally profitable.
Yeah.
Not for the populations fighting them, of course.
No, the people on the ground only experience loss. The economic incentives are entirely decoupled from the physical risk.
Totally decoupled. The scripts assert that war is an incredibly lucrative industry for the entities funding, manufacturing, and supplying the conflict.
Right.
Every time a guided missile strikes a building, someone, somewhere, manufactured that missile. Someone secured the raw material, someone sold it. Someone signed a multi-billion-dollar contract to replenish the stockpile.
It reminds me of the subprime mortgage crisis, actually, but applied to geopolitics.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Right. Like in the 2008 financial crash, banks bundled these highly toxic, risky mortgages, sanitized them with complex financial language, and passed the risk off to people who never understood what they were buying.
Yeah, the everyday people.
The architects of the crisis made millions and faced almost no consequences, while ordinary people lost their homes.
Exactly.
The documentary is basically arguing that war operates on a similar supply chain. The political leaders and defense contractors take on geopolitical risk, meaning escalation, but they don't hold the toxic assets.
Right.
The toxic assets are the falling bombs, the shattered infrastructure, and the displaced families. The civilians hold all the risk, while the architects hold all the profits.
That is a highly accurate comparison of the mechanics involved. The economic incentives for conflict are quietly managed in boardrooms far away from the rubble.
So far away.
But the authors argue it isn't just physical weapons keeping the war machine turning. It is the weaponization of information itself.
So what does this all mean for how we consume information? Because the production notes dedicate a lot of time to the idea of indifference as a manufactured product.
This raises an important question about the psychology of modern conflict. The filmmakers argue that the true engine of endless war is fear specifically, the fear of the other.
Right.
And this fear doesn't happen organically on this scale. It is fed to the public daily through algorithmic news feeds, through statistics that erase human faces, and through political rhetoric that systematically dehumanizes entire populations.
Right, because algorithms prioritize engagement, and nothing drives engagement quite like fear and outrage.
Exactly.
The media format strips out the context. It's so much easier for a population to support a prolonged conflict when the casualties are presented as sterile numbers on a screen or sweeping arrows on a graphic, rather than showing the raw reality of a father digging his child's backpack out of concrete rubble.
The sanitization we talked about at the beginning is a vital component of the business model.
It really is.
Because if you saw the raw, unfiltered reality of a kinetic strike every time you turned on the television, the public appetite for strategic patience would evaporate overnight.
Absolutely.
Therefore, the documentary's ultimate conclusion is that actively choosing to see the human being beneath the headlines is a profound act of resistance.
I love that.
Refusing to give in to the engineered fear of the other actually disrupts the psychological supply chain of war.
The scripts make this beautiful unifying point, too. The vast majority of human beings on this planet, whether they are waking up in Tel Aviv, Tehran, Beirut, Gaza,
Right.
or Ohio, they do not wake up desiring conquest or revenge. They want a safe home, they want a stable future for their kids, and they want peace.
That's all anyone wants?
The desires of the populations are fundamentally aligned. It is the infrastructure of power that pits them against each other.
Exactly. The infrastructure of power requires division to maintain its leverage.
So, to bring all of this together, the overarching thesis we've explored today is that wars are rarely decided by a single glorious battle. That is a myth of cinema.
Hollywood fiction.
Right. In reality, wars are decided by endurance, by the exhaustion of resources, and by the horrific amount of time stolen from people who never fired a single shot.
It's a war of attrition on human lives.
The documentary drafts we've looked at challenge you to look past the political maps and the sterile vocabulary of statecraft. They demand that human value be placed back at the absolute center of the geopolitical conversation.
And building on the evidence presented in these drafts, I think there is a vital final thought to explore here.
Go for it.
The sources forcefully argue that history ultimately judges those who choose power over people, exposing war as a global industry driven by fear and immense profit.
Yeah.
But if that economic incentive, the sheer profitability of manufacturing and selling conflict, is so deeply and globally entrenched, what would it actually take to dismantle the business of war itself, rather than just endlessly negotiating the next temporary ceasefire?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, how do you defund a system when the system writes the rules of global finance?
Well, that is a massive structural question, and one we all really need to be asking. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into these incredible documentary sources.
It was a fascinating read.
It really was. As you go about your day, we encourage you to keep questioning the headlines. Look for the human mechanisms operating behind the statistics.
Always.
And the next time you hear a politician talk about calculated escalation or leverage, ask yourself who is actually paying the price for that calculation down on the street. Until next time.